Alright, and Pale Realms of Shade, Part 3. Now I was in pain. More pain than a living man can understand. When I thought this, so maybe that explains why I didn't trample that thought and throw it away. I petted it and fed it by telling myself that she wouldn't have shot me if he had not seduced her. She'd always been sweet on him. Girls are drawn to weak men that they can gild and domesticate, especially smart girls. She had never cheated on me, except, now I found out, in her heart, with him. He had her in his arms right now. They were whispering and giggling about me, and she was telling him how much better he was, now that business was picking up. A better provider, a better man, able to buy her whatever she wanted, furs and jewels and empty vanities, trips to Broadway shows, and all that money came from my corpse, from that insurance she insisted I buy. If I were a poltergeist, a spirit of rage, a spirit of death, and there was no use denying it now, then I could still touch the physical world. That meant I could drop a pill into a drink, cut a brake line in a moving car, pull a trigger, throw a knife. Hell, I could bash his skull in with a brick while he slept. I felt the mortal world pulling me again. It was strong, insistent. I was like a game fish caught on a line. Why tug against the hook? I rose up in a wash of sudden motion. At first I wasn't sure where or when I was. It was a darkened room with shelves and tables covered with bric-a-brac. The floor was covered with butcher paper and old newspapers. It might have been a cluttered museum closed for repair, or maybe an abandoned antique shop. Here were masks on the wall of long-nosed creatures with a spiked chin, or bat-eared creatures with curving fangs, or albino foxes smiling sweetly. Next to the mask were braided whips on hooks with bits of bones and metal woven into the lash. Next were staples in the walls from which dangled chains with manacles and gyves. A wall niche had a blue-faced idol of a many-armed goddess. One leg was raised in a dance step, each of her hands holding a bloody weapon or a severed head, while a necklace of skulls were draped across the outrageous metal balloons of her breasts. She was stepping on a kowtowing dwarf. On one shelf were knives with serrated brass knuckles built into the guards. Other shelves held Coptic jars, or bottles filled with pickled meats, or eyes, or organs. In the back corner loomed an iron maiden, gently smiling, complete with channels in the base for the blood to run into a water bowl for the cat. Hanging from the ceiling was more ghastly clutter. Medallions of pentagrams and St. Peter's crosses, mummified hands with painted fingernails, wooden puppets with exaggerated carved groins to engage in various unnatural acts, an alligator body with the head of a dead man attached to its neck, stuffed and tanned, with eyes replaced by glass beads. The real alligator head was in a corner by the door, its open jaws being used as an umbrella stand. Snakes and scorpions hung by their tails among shrunken heads. In a fish tank hanging by chains in the centre of the roof writhed groups of luminous and transparent eels, whose eyes had been gored out and the sockets sewn shut. It was good to see something alive. The walls were covered with mosaics showing overweight Aztec priestesses bearing and flaying children and offering them to gods with goggling eyes and protruding tongues. On a wooden music stand, a black leather volume, bigger than a phone book, was chained and padlocked. The candelabrum was a dead man's hand, with wax candles burning on each finger and thumb. On a rack next to it was a wand cut with Viking runes, a black knife made of volcanic glass, a cup of green copper, a ball of dark brown crystal with a red glow of its heart. On a throne made of iron rib cages and steel skulls, someone had propped the corpse of a Franciscan friar, complete with rope belt and tall hood, and propped a pair of sunglasses on his nose, like an actress from California might wear. The mouth of the corpse had been stitched open into a grin, and all his teeth were black iron. All this gear was throbbing, not with the living heat that comes from man, but with a sucking, terrible cold. I was pierced with numbness through to my broken bones, which brought such a relief that, for a moment, I didn't see how morbid and grotesque the litter of the crowded chamber was. I saw a window and a red neon sign in it, but the abnormal letters were from some language I did not recognise. There was a looking glass in the frame, carved like a snake eating its own tail, standing directly opposite the window. I looked at myself, now that the pain was numbed, and tried to imagine myself looking human again. I couldn't do it. I couldn't remember what a human looked like. First, I was a headless dwarf with oversized arms and legs, with eyeballs at my nipples and a mouth at my navel. Then I was a horror with a red funnel for a head, with an eyeball on my tongue, and the mouth was a circle of teeth. Then my head was on backwards, and my legs were coming out my armpits. The sensation of sick horror ebbed a bit, and I finally ended up looking like a hood and crooked thing, with dangling arms and the head of a hairless vulture. My knees bent the wrong way, like a dog leg, but at least I was upright and almost humanoid. Then I noticed the window. I could see it in the mirror. "Pen! We sell God! We fix it!" Of course, the neon letters from inside the pawn shop were backwards because I was looking at their backsides. The mirror image restored themselves. I walked on my backward feet toward this window. I saw no door, but there was a tapestry with an image of the great god Pan hanging in the right spot to hide one. I looked out the window. I was right across the street from where Lorelei had called me earlier. Saint Street. My earlier. I didn't know where in mortal time this was. I could see now that the alley was abutting a hotel, one I recognised. It was a hot sheet joint, one where lovers met for a bottle of wine and an hour of privacy. The St. Valentine Comfort, it was called. I tried to put my hand through the window like a moonbeam to avoid breaking it, but I found that it was solid to me. Something was keeping me here. Bending my vulture head down, I made the floor litter transparent to my eyes. Beneath the layer of newspapers were the Oriental trigrams and the isosceles triangles, a circle inscribed with a pentacle, a calling circle. That meant that Lorelei had not called me that first time. I had been pulled toward the pawn shop. Here, and my memories of her and of hers of mine had blown me off course like a ship snatched by a gale as it was about to enter the harbour. But then, why had she been here? As I put my hand down, a sense of warmth, of pleasure, tingled through my claw fingers. I had accidentally brushed against a small golden tray of wafers, each one small as a silver dollar, resting on the sill right under the "We Sell God" sign. All numbness was gone. My imaginary bones were straight. My body stopped hurting just like that. The pain was gone. I could no longer envision nor imagine myself as wounded. In fact, looking at my hands, they seemed like a young man's hands, like I remembered them back when I played football in school or toted a rifle at Normandy. Strong hands. No nicotine stains in the fingers. No scars on the knuckles. I was nude without being naked, for I was clothed in a warm light that shined from my pores. But then I pulled my clothing, shoes and fedora and trench coat out of my memory, and found myself dressed in that. What had I touched? Before I recalled that I couldn't touch anything, I picked up a wee disc of bread and held it up to the light. It was a communion wafer. There was a wee cross on the surface, and the letters INRI. I never did know who Inri was, or why his or her name was written over the images of Christ on the cross. Must have been some early disciple or something. One moment I was holding the wafer and looking at it, and the next, when I remembered that I was in a shade, it slipped through my fingers. And I mean through my fingers. And it floated for a moment and fell against the window as if caught by a freak ghost, laying flat and sliding downward. At the same moment, the neon sign it brushed against flickered and went dark, and the street lamp outside burned out. The only light now was inside, from the candles in the dead man's fingers, and the glow-in-the-dark blind eels trapped in the ceiling tank. It made the window into an impromptu mirror. In that mirror, I could see the hooded friar on the throne of iron bones behind me. His sunglasses were now turned toward me, and the sutured open grin had widened. He was alive, or at least able to move. I turned. The real one in the room with me seemed dead enough. I looked back at the reflection. He smiled and nodded in a genial fashion, like he was my favourite uncle, and he opened his glove. In the palm was a wee white dot of silver light that I somehow knew, the way you know things in dreams you cannot possibly know, that the planet Venus was in his hands. He was holding the morning star. Neat trick, I said. Coffee break. I wasn't sure which way to face. I decided on facing the motionless corpse. I figured that if something was going to hurt me, that was the direction it would come from. Then he spoke in a voice like a silver violin, and the music of his words came from the reflection in the dark glass. I spun back in that direction, startled. "You come to us because you are broken," he said. "We fix all things." "What are you?" "As we said, we fix all things. Did you not see the signs?" "What is your name?" "It was blotted from the book of life. There is no name to say." "If I can't say your name, what the hell am I supposed to call you?" Again with an iron-toothy grin. "Fixer." I stood there, thunderstruck. Sly had been right about that all along. I moved and put my imaginary back to the Iron Maiden, where I could keep both the dead friar and his reflection in my angle of view. He was not just cold, he was like the South Pole. The cold was coming from both the corpse and the reflection like a crosswind. I didn't know how much, if any, heat I was giving off. I was cold compared to a human, but I was an absolute zero. I assumed mine was like an echo or a memory of heat, embers from a newly dead fire. But he was hungry for it. This cold was like something wanting to eat up all the heat in the universe. The South Pole? Maybe the South Pole of Pluto, or some smaller world with no name that wandered away from its orbit and is falling forever and ever in the unending blackness between the stars. But this was something much worse than merely a clever warlock running a crime ring, or some ambitious were seal from Atlantis. Even the heavy hitters in the Big League, figures of strong and ancient dread like Baba Yaga, and the Headless Horseman, and the Wolf of the Mist, and Gabalunzi the King's Beggar, all of them were small potatoes compared to this. "Quite a collection you've got here," I said. "What are you? A devil worshipper?" "Not at all. Let others worship. We merely see things as they should be, and bow the knee to none. Is liberty such a vice?" Suddenly, feeling nervous, I sat back to the window. I didn't like being near the reflection, but the little wafers of bread were like a campfire in the sub-zero cold. I picked one up, but it was slippery, as if the little winds too gentle to detect were trying to pluck it out of my hand. I found that it would rest on my right palm if I cupped my left beneath my right and support it, like a two-handed grip on a gun. The warmth beat on my chin and face, making me dizzy. "This is a little out of place," I said. "Why the communion bread? I can tell it's not been desecrated." This time the corpse in the room did move. Like the reflection, he lifted his glove, and I saw he held a star in his hand. Smiling beneath his blind sunglasses, the hooded head now nodded toward the window, and part of the neon sign flickered into life for a moment, and then died again. "We sell God," he said. Of course. The act of selling the hoist desecrated it. There was a special word for that. Simony? Simonism? Zionism? Thomism? Something like that. Maybe I should have paid more attention to catechism class back when I was an altar boy. But Sly had always known that kind of thing. I had been the go-to guy for Romany lore, voodoo practices, and legend from the Catskills. Maybe, thinking back, I had relied on him for a lot of things. A worm of the thought stirred in my brain again. It reminded me how much I hated him. "What is this wee stuff?" I said. You got lice." The hooded figure moved back and forth as the figure shook its head. "You ask not rightly." I wondered what the rightly we to ask was supposed to be. "How many of you are there?" "Many. We are legion." "What the hell?" "Indeed, and well said. We are many. Many have we absorbed, and each screaming relic still trembles and suffers inside us. We are hell. Hell is us, nor do we escape it. Numberless soils boil and burn inside us, and are consumed, and ever consumed, and none shall pluck them ever from my hungry, grisly jaws." He opened his mouth wide. He had no tongue, but spikes and thorns coated every surface of his mouth and throat. His throat was glowing, as if he'd swallowed a red coal. Then his breath, which was strangely dry and warm and putrid, struck my face. And in the breath I heard, dimly as in a nightmare, the screams and sobs and moans and cries of piercing and despair. Men and women and children, and all voices filled with fear and cursing and purest hate. It was the children's voices that were the worst. "Shut your damned mouth," I said, putting my head down to my hands, trying to breathe in the odour of the circle of bread so that I wouldn't pass out. "None can close the throat of hell," he smirked. "Shall we now to business?" "What do you want, fixer?" "To fix you. You are broken. Has not the sacrament of confession rejected you, ignited you, tormented you, and cast you away? No healing comes from there. To the dead that door is shut. The dead are never risen again." "I hate riddles. Speak plain, what do you want from me?" "Nay, ask again what it is you want. We shall be generous to grant. Liberty, freedom. We are the prince of free thinkers." Against my better judgment, I was curious what he had to say. "You're babbling, fixer. Liberty from what?" "Prison. You cannot depart this world until your unfinished business here is done." "What business?" He nodded, and the street light across the way came back to life, so that his reflection vanished. "She is drawn back to that house of adultery by memory, even as you are. Here she first broke her marriage vow. Here she first betrayed you." "You're lying. She was always faithful." "Faithful to her womanhood. My snake coupled with Eve beneath the tree of carnal knowledge, and all her daughters are like unto her. It was with your partner's love, warm, pulsing inside her loins, when she went back to the office to return the bottle of pills she had stolen. You see, she used them each time to remove the memory, and so remove the guilt. Each time she thought it was the first time, and that made the lure of breaking the law all the more delicious." "With Sylvester?" "He resisted at first, because he loves her, because his lust for her burns deeply. But he is a stupid man, and no match for her wiles." I wondered what the hesitation had been, that catch in his throat. Could he even make mistakes, or was everything an act? But no one outwits the devil's lies. I was out of my depth. "I want to go," I said sullenly. "Now." "Your will is of no matter," he smiled, keeping his lips together. "You cannot depart from this world until your business here is done. Twice you have been told that you are broken. Now a third time we say it. Ask of us, what shall we give you?" It took me a moment to puzzle out that last sentence. You mean you're going to do me a favour? He didn't even bother to snort at that. He merely turned the dark eye shapes of the sunglasses toward me with a sardonic tilt of his head. A bargain, then, I said slowly. A deal with the devil. Those usually turn out badly. Why have you not passed beyond, then? What keeps you in this sad world of suffering and absurdity? You are chained here, chained to a few spots. What do they all cry out for you to do that you may rest? Which spots? Here in the pawn shop, because I've been called here. The street outside where Lorelei was there. The place where I was shot, not long after I was shot. The place where I was buried, quite a long time before I was buried. I shook my head. I didn't see a pattern. Vengeance. But I forgive her. Her? And he smiled. Who speaks of her? You mean Sly? He didn't shoot me. The hooded figure raised a finger, the hand that wasn't holding the star, and pointed. I looked and made the wall transparent. There he was. I could see Sly walking down the street in his long coat. The collar was up and his head was down, as if he were hoping no one would notice his face. He was not wearing that ugly oversized hat he was so proud of. The fixer said, The gas main under the hotel is leaking, and the basement filled with fumes. There's a tiny stone, a bit of flint, which fell long ago from some ill-fitted crate, and there is a broken blade of knife which snapped off in a man's ribs and lodged in the wall there. Look, you can see. And I could. I could see through the street and the basement wall to where he pointed. You have the power, he said. Ask the flint to rise up and strike the steel, and there will be a spark. One spark is all that is needed now. I didn't want to kill him, I said, but it tasted like a lie in my mouth. He will be as you are now. Is that so bad? And do you know why he is here? He forgot his hat. In the room, in the dark, when he clutched her beautiful and sweating hot body in his arms, when they rutted like swine in heat, grunting, and he poured his sperm into her in a vast, hot, stiff explosion, a joy lost to you now forever. He took no pills. He remembers. And with your death he is free to enjoy her and use her and spew his seed into her as he might spit into a spittoon on the floor, until the amusement of plundering you and yours is weariness to him. Is this not cause enough to kill? It is justice. The scale is unbalanced. Strike the flint against the steel, and you will be whole.